Most people are waiting for a breakthrough to change their life. I think we all experience this. We wait for society, for the world, some kind of external event, some moment of revelation to make us make the decision or the choice to get out of whatever slump or hole that we've dug, right? Whenever we feel misaligned, we want to outsource that issue to the world. And sometimes, yes, life does offer us a signal, an indication, a way back onto the path, a bit of inspiration, but more often than not, that is not the case. Real change doesn't arrive as a gift. It arrives as a decision, an important decision, right? Unless a person has no agency at all, right? The responsibility to move forward eventually comes back to the individual. And that's where reintegration actually begins. Not as a philosophy, not as a framework, not as anything else but a practice. If integration is the idea and philosophy, then reintegration is the practice. It's the small, consistent actions that help you keep aligned and anchored, that help you keep here and that help you keep on the path, right? Because you don't stay on the path just by understanding it, just by reasoning with it. You can't often logic your way through hardships or depression, right? There's something else you have to do there. You have to stay on the path by walking it. Such a cliche, but every tiny step, one step at a time, one foot in front of the other, you have to consciously make that decision to keep walking. So if you stop walking long enough, you drift. You drift because the world continues to move. So reintegration isn't a moment. It isn't a revelation. It isn't a breakthrough. It's a pattern. It's a practice. It's the discipline of return. And this is something I learned long before I actually had the language for it. And I think that's what happens when we learn something. We understand it at one level inside of us, but it needs to be understood at many different levels. So when I was in my first year of my Bachelor of Creative Arts, which on some levels I do regret doing, but interestingly, one of the first big things that I learned was that creativity often doesn't come from inspiration. It normally comes from repetition, from doing the reps, putting in the work, putting in the hours, through being so familiar with something, a technique, a tool, a method, that a small deviation from that normality is actually the true creativity. That's the breakthrough, right? It's from this consistency. It's almost comes out of something that isn't exciting. And I find that to be my breakthrough now. When psychologists study geniuses, what they find isn't only intelligence, but they find that some of the key characteristics that they share is perseverance and motivation, right? Motivation gives you the direction, and perseverance, persistence keeps you on the path. So If you outsource your agency to the world, and if you wait for permission or a rescue or the perfect conditions, you will wait your entire life. I'm sure you've heard this. That's why cliches can actually hit really hard at the right moment. It's all about timing. When you hear it at the right time, it hits. So for me, this practice of reintegration isn't a performance. It's not showy. It isn't dramatic. It's not breakthroughs. It's a quiet, repetitive practice. And I think that's why it works. You chip away at it. You commit to it. One of the hardest things about reintegration is that it isn't a once-off decision. It's a continuous commitment. That's what a practice is. A continuous commitment despite any kind of motivation or inspiration around doing the thing, right? So that's why I think that the simpler the practice, the more sustainable it becomes, right? The practice doesn't need to be complex. It doesn't need to be 100 rules, perfect structure, or super strict. In fact, the more complicated it is, the easier it is for us to abandon, to tap out, right? That's what happens all the time, especially if you pick a practice that isn't suited and tailored around you. If you pick somebody else's practice for the sake of it, chances of you sticking to it is zilch, right? Because it's not your practice. It doesn't resonate with you. It doesn't make sense for you. When I think about practice, I keep coming back to two ancient ideas, right, as the starting point for a practice. Okay? Two ancient ideas. Meditation, prayer, right? Different traditions, same essence, right? Both are daily forms of reflection. Both are about regrounding and reorientating yourself to your why. And they don't need an hour. They can just take a few minutes, right? A few minutes is enough to remember why you're walking the path that you've chosen. Because every day is a small addition. But those small additions do eventually compound, right? Linear consistency beats sporadic intensity every time. A little every day is more powerful than doing a lot occasionally. So the other elements of a practice need to support your direction, right? In a general sense, the parts of a practice will be your body, your mind, rest, and nourishment. 4 elements of a good practice. Not because they're trendy, but because they reduce the resistance to the life you're trying to live. So however you define that is personal. Science can give you some general guidance, but you decide how it fits your purpose. So for me, reintegration as a practice has 3 core elements. Remembering, which is the returning to your why. Reflecting, being honest about your experience while pursuing it. And reinforcing, doing the things that make your path easier to walk. It's not about optimizing the journey. It's about being present inside of it. Because we all know the goal isn't the destination. It's who you become while walking towards it, right? So reintegration isn't dramatic. It's remembering, reflecting, and reinforcing over and over again. So here's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. And it's about people, right? When I was younger, I admired chaos, nonconformity, disruption, pushing back against authority, breaking rules, because I thought that being different was the same as being real, being unique, uniquely you. But as I've grown, I've noticed something that's very humbling, actually. The people who really build things, the people who help others, the people who carry the weight of the world, their lives generally aren't that dramatic, right? They're ordinary, they're simple, consistent, back to basics. They show up and they do the right thing again and again and again. I used to look down on what I would call normal people, but now I see that most of the strength in the world lives with these people, because real uniqueness doesn't come from rejecting everything. It comes from tiny deviations built on a stable foundation. The most interesting people in the world aren't wildly different. They're slightly different, but deeply consistent. They're the same person every single time you meet them. Their consistency is a power, and their repetition is their character. They work the same muscles, they refine the same behaviors, they master the basics, and yes, they are often overlooked. The ones who keep their heads down at work, the people who don't perform out loud, the people who you may not consider to be cool, they're the real ones. I think my obsession with being cool cost me a lot, to be honest, because when you chase difference for its own sake, you sacrifice what is real, what is true, and what is good. The quiet discipline of return to meaning is heroic. A hero doesn't do the right thing once. A hero does the right thing most of the time, for a long time. To be normal in this sense for me is to be free, right? You become useful, reliable, and a source of meaning and stability for others. Because if your signal isn't stable, then the message can't be carried, right? So this is my respect to the ones who stayed consistent, who kept the basics alive, who didn't chase spectacle. They built the foundations, because maintaining the basics isn't boring. It's hard, it's rare, and it's what makes reintegration possible. So, shout out to the normies. Stay on your way.